Hello and welcome to Travel Alchemist. In this video we'll look at our time in Leh, Ladakh in North India. Leh is in the northernmost region of India, part of the Union Territory of Ladakh. It sits between the Himalayas and the Karakoram Mountains at an altitude of about 3,500 metres. Up here you feel the lack of oxygen almost immediately. There's about 65% the availability of oxygen than at sea level. So it's a struggle to breathe, and even the smallest exertion gets you out of breath. The general consensus is to rest and acclimatise for at least 2 days on arrival in Leh. We did this, booking a little guest house right in the centre of town, Paradise Leh. However, we both suffered with mild symptoms of acute mountain sickness, or AMS. Leh is in a pretty unique but very volatile region. The religions, culture and cuisine is highly influenced by Himalayan Buddhism, and prayer flags are hung practically everywhere. In the town centre are several mosques, gurdwaras, mandirs, but mostly there are stupas, prayer wheels and Buddhist monasteries, usually perched high up a mountain top and adorned with photos of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. We instantly fell in love. On our first day after acclimatising, we stayed local and walked up to Leh Palace, which is up on the mountains overlooking the town. The views here are spectacular. In the evening we wanted to go up to the monastery, which is above Leh Palace. There's a road that goes up there, but also a hiking route up. So we decided to divide and conquer and both do our favourite hobbies. I rented a motorbike for a few hours and drove up, and Dave hiked up. We met at the top for an amazing sunset. After 4 seemingly very long days of acclimatising, we finally felt ready to do something more substantial, and so we booked a taxi trip to some of the sites along the Indus Valley towards the confluence of Indus and Zanskar rivers. We visited Spituk Monastery, Gurdwara Pathar Sahib, Magnetic Hill and the confluence viewpoint. Spituk Monastery was nice and the Gurdwara was very interesting. Magnetic Hill, on the other hand, was a bit weird and more just like an Instagram hotspot. It was packed and everyone was in the road doing these mad poses. If you don't have your own transport, then the local taxi rank is your friend. And luckily, all prices are fixed by the government and very affordable. So, the next day, we just hailed a private taxi from the taxi rank and asked to visit Stakna Monastery, which is quite iconic, sat on top of an outcrop along the river valley. I think it was probably our favourite monastery from the whole trip, for no other reason than we were the only ones there when we visited. It was beautiful and serene, which added to the spiritual feeling of the place. We arrived and looked around the outside first, spinning all the prayer wheels. We poked our heads inside the monastery and it was very quiet, but a young monk appeared from one of the dorms and asked us if we wanted to go inside the temple area. It was the most brightly painted temple we saw and had a super ancient anteroom. That afternoon we also shopped around for a 4-day trip out to some of the neighbouring valleys, Nubra, Shyok and Pangong Lake. The routes to these places take you up and over some of the highest passes in the world. Khardung is the most famous one to the north of Leh and used to be the world's highest road. A lot of signs still claim it to be the highest, but it's actually now just the 11th highest in the world, as many new roads have been built and are continuing to be built, pretty much all in this region of Ladakh. As mentioned before, prices are generally fixed, so the price was 29,000 rupees for the taxi for 4 days. And the company that we booked with, Yak Travels, advertised the trip on a board outside their shop. We found 2 other people to join us, an older man from Korea who spoke very little English, and Katerina, a girl our age from Serbia who we really got on with and made the trip very enjoyable. We were both a little nervous about the trip, in honesty, mostly because of how badly we both suffered from altitude sickness in the first couple of days. We wondered if going up and over 5,300 metres would be the same, but really the journey was absolutely fine. The drive was stunning, surrounded by the giant peaks of the Himalayas and Karakoram mountains. But the road was also busy, and each view stop was quite crowded, including the stop right at the top. We tried to escape the crowds by going a little further up on foot and walked up to the stupa at the top of Khardung, 15 metres above the pass. There was no one else up here, but the air was so thin, the short walk got us completely out of breath. But being at this altitude, we just spent a few minutes there before heading back to the car and continuing to Hunder in the Nubra Valley. After a brief stop for lunch, we continued through the valley of the Spituk River and stopped at Diskit Monastery and Buddha. The Buddha was huge and completely dominated the whole region. It was pretty cool. We planned to stay 2 nights in Hunder. That evening, Dave, Katerina and I walked around the village. We visited a waterfall and dipped our feet into the freezing cold glacial river. Then in the evening we went back out to do some stargazing with Dave. With the high altitude and thin atmosphere, the skies here were incredible. The next day we set off early to drive further into the valley towards the Indian-Pakistan border. We were visiting the village of Turtuk. This was actually a really beautiful little village, and we wished that we'd stayed here longer, perhaps spending a night here instead of 2 in Hunder. The village was lush and green and hanging in apricots. All of the trees were full and ripe. There were little man-made channels directing the river, winding through all the lanes of the village, so all the walks followed the channels. It reminded me a little of Madeira and the Levadas. Since we were driving there and back in one day, we only had a couple of hours in Turtuk, which was a real shame. But the drive was also stunning, following the Spituk River, which was showing its force, a dark mud colour and full of rapids. We'd also heard about cloudbursts in the region, and we left just in time, I think, as the clouds followed us all the way back to Hunder. We didn't get caught in the rain, we stayed just ahead. When we woke up, there were some local signs of light rain, but nothing major. However, the driver told us that the direct route from where we were to Pangong Lake was all flooded and impassable. Therefore, our only option to get to the lake today was to return to Leh first and then go out again from Leh. This would add an extra 140 kilometres of driving to our day. But with no other options, we went for it. The road to Pangong Lake takes you over Chang High Pass, which actually we much preferred over Khardung, even though it's not as popular. We found this road much quieter, with far fewer cars, no traffic or other people at the stops, and the scenery much more varied and green. Plus, the road condition was much nicer, as it was tarmacked the whole way. Nubra Valley, where we were the previous day, was one of the places that I'd had pinned in my Google Maps for a really long time, as it's often called the Valley of Flowers. However, the road to Pangong from Leh, which is known as Zanskar Valley, had way more flowers, yellows and purples, and was much more beautiful than Nubra, and we were so glad that we got to spend more time on this beautiful road. We eventually arrived at Pangong Lake and found a place to stay. At 4,350 metres, nearly 1,000 metres higher than Leh, it was much colder here, and we finally got a chance to wear our cold weather clothes, some of which was the first and still the only time that we wore them on our 6-month trip. In the morning, the clouds finally started to clear and we were able to see the lake in the sun. It truly is beautiful. So many different shades of blue. But we had to set off again at about 10 o'clock to get back to Leh. We stopped on the road back to Leh to visit Diskit Monastery, which is probably the most impressive in the region, with its long row of prayer wheels up the mountain. There's also another giant Buddha inside the temple. We finally made it back to Leh, and the next few days rolled together. We mostly spent the days chilling and mooching about the town, or visiting more local monasteries. We walked up to the palace or the castle monastery of Leh most nights to watch the sunset. And we did take one trip into Hemis National Park to try and spot some local wildlife. We loved Leh, and all in all spent almost 2 weeks here. The scenery, people, snow-capped mountains, monasteries and spirituality all together make Leh a remarkable place, and we didn't want to leave. What do you think? Have you visited Leh? If you have any tips or tricks, let us know in the comments. And don't forget to check out my blog, travelalchemist.blog. Bye!